I caught a glimpse of my husband slipping the white powder into my seafood gumbo, reflected in the polished silver serving tray. My heart was slamming so hard against my ribs, I honestly thought it might crack my chest open. But I didn't scream. I didn't jump up or knock the bowl to the floor. Instead, I waited for the perfect moment of distraction, swapped my bowl with my mother-in-law's, and started a silent, 5-minute countdown in my head. My name is Charmaine. I'm 35 years old, and somehow, I'm still healing from the wounds my own family inflicted. As a successful software developer and forensic accountant, I've spent years building an empire they could only ever dream of. I escaped their toxicity early on but kept occasional contact. Last Sunday, they insisted on a traditional family dinner to catch up. Right there, between the cornbread and the sweet tea, my mother-in-law leaned in with a smirk. You know, Charmaine, you're lucky we even include you. Pity goes a long way. I just sipped my water and smiled, fully aware of what was in the food she was about to eat. Before I continue with the story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you've ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Growing up in Fairfield looked like privilege to outsiders. But inside our sprawling colonial home, emotional coldness touched every corner. Our 4-bedroom house, with its manicured lawn and heated pool, was a fortress of expectations I could never quite meet. My childhood bedroom, painted pale blue at my mother Elaine's insistence, despite my preference for green, became my sanctuary in that prison. From elementary school through high school, I kept straight A's, joined honor societies, and eventually built a career that made me a self-made millionaire. But to my husband, Terrence, and his overbearing family, my success was just a resource for them to use. Let's go back to that Sunday dinner table. The air in the formal dining room was thick with the smell of rich spices and simmering seafood. Terrence, my husband of 5 years, sat to my right. He was a real estate agent who spent more on tailored suits and luxury car leases than he ever brought in from commissions. Across from me sat his sister, Kesha, a 30-year-old who still expected a weekly allowance from her brother. And at the head of the table sat Mama Beatrice. She was the finance director of a massive local megachurch, a woman who wore her religion like a weapon and judged anyone who didn't bow to her absolute authority. I sat perfectly still, my eyes fixed on the gleaming surface of the silver platter in the center of the table. That's when I saw it. Terrence reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a small glass vial, and hastily tapped a heavy dose of white powder into my bowl of gumbo. He thought I was distracted by Kesha showing me a picture on her phone. He thought he was being slick. But my analytical mind was already racing, piecing together the financial anomalies I'd noticed in his accounts over the past month. He was broke, drowning in underground debt and desperate. And I was worth far more to him, dead or institutionalized, than I was alive. Mama Beatrice cleared her throat loudly, demanding the room's attention. She adjusted her designer glasses and looked at me with pure disdain. Charmaine, she began, her voice dripping with fake concern. I was speaking with the elder women at the church auxiliary board yesterday. They were asking why Terrence doesn't have a strong son to carry on his name yet. I had to tell them that my daughter-in-law is too focused on her little computer codes to fulfill her biological duties as a wife. It's a crying shame, really. A woman who can't give her husband a child is practically useless to a family legacy. I felt the familiar sting of her cruelty, a poison in its own right. But today it didn't break me. Today I knew exactly what kind of monsters I was sitting with. I looked her right in the eye, keeping my face completely neutral. My career is what paid for the very table we're eating on, Mama Beatrice, I replied calmly. And it paid for the roof over your head when your church salary fell short last year. Kesha scoffed loudly, rolling her eyes as she reached for a thick piece of cornbread. Oh please. You act like typing on a keyboard all day makes you superior to the rest of us. Terrence is out there in the real world closing deals, building a real estate empire, while you just sit in your home office staring at multiple screens like a weirdo. You should be down on your knees, grateful that a handsome man like my brother even puts up with your cold, robotic attitude. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing in her face. Terrence hadn't closed a single real estate deal in 8 months. His so-called empire was nothing but maxed out credit cards and hidden payday loans. But I let them have their fleeting moment of arrogant triumph. I had a much bigger game to play. Terrence cleared his throat, shifting nervously in his expensive leather chair. He pushed the bowl of tainted gumbo closer to me, his hand brushing against mine. "Come on, babe," he said, his voice carrying a false, honeyed warmth that made my skin crawl. "Eat your food before it gets cold. You know, my mother spent all afternoon in the kitchen making this just for you." I looked down at the rich, dark broth. The powder had dissolved completely, leaving absolutely no trace of the heavy tranquilizers or hallucinogens he'd just introduced into my meal. I needed a distraction. I needed exactly 3 seconds of unobserved time. "Terrence," I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady, "could you grab the hot sauce from the kitchen counter? I think I need a little more kick in my bowl today." Terrence frowned, clearly annoyed by the delay in his twisted plan, but he nodded. "Sure, babe. Whatever you need." He stood up and turned his back to walk into the adjacent kitchen. At that exact moment, Kesha dropped her cloth napkin and bent down under the table to get it. Mama Beatrice turned her head sharply to look out the bay window, complaining loudly about a neighbor's car parked too close to her driveway. The timing was absolutely flawless. My hands moved with lightning speed. I grabbed the edge of my bowl, lifted it silently, and swapped it with Mama Beatrice's identical bowl of gumbo, sitting just inches away. The heavy ceramic bowls traded places without making a single scraping sound against the mahogany wood. By the time Terrence walked back into the dining room with the hot sauce, my hands were neatly folded in my lap, and I was staring blankly at the far wall. "Here you go," Terrence said, setting the glass bottle down next to my right hand. "Now eat up. You need your strength for the week ahead." I picked up my silver spoon and dipped it into the safe, untainted broth now sitting in front of me. "Thank you, Terrence," I said softly, looking him directly in his lying eyes. "This looks absolutely delicious." I took a measured bite. It was perfect. Then I shifted my gaze to Mama Beatrice. She had finished complaining about the neighbor and picked up her own spoon. She plunged it deep into the bowl that had been in front of me just moments before. She scooped up a large portion of shrimp, sausage, and broth, blew on it delicately to cool it down, and put it directly into her mouth. She swallowed the poison. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I started counting the seconds in my head. Given the sheer volume of powder Terrence had dumped into that bowl, whatever cocktail of drugs he was trying to dose me with was going to hit hard and fast. I kept eating my food, forcing my jaw to chew at a normal, relaxed pace. Terrence sat back in his chair, watching me intensely from across the table. He was waiting for my eyes to glaze over. He was waiting for me to collapse, seize, or start hallucinating. His complete lack of remorse was the most terrifying part of this whole ordeal. He sat there calmly drinking his sweet iced tea, fully prepared to watch his wife of 5 years lose her mind, and potentially her life. Also, he could cash in on whatever twisted insurance payout he had concocted. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked loudly, marking the passage of time. "So, Charmaine," Mama Beatrice said, taking another large spoonful of the poison gumbo and chewing loudly. "How is that little software project of yours coming along? Still pretending it's going to replace a real, respectable job?" "It's going very well," I replied smoothly, wiping my mouth with my napkin. "In fact, I'm about to finalize a massive security update that exposes hidden vulnerabilities in offshore financial systems. It's truly amazing what people think they can hide when they assume no one is actively watching their accounts." Terrence flinched slightly at my words, a flash of genuine panic crossing his face, but he quickly recovered. Kesha just snorted dismissively and went back to scrolling through her social media. 3 minutes had passed. Mama Beatrice was on her 4th heavy spoonful of the contaminated stew. I watched her closely, calculating her body language. Her precise, elegant movements were starting to become rigid and uncoordinated. She blinked several times rapidly, as if trying to clear a sudden, heavy fog from her vision. She reached for her crystal water glass, but her hand trembled violently, making the ice cubes clink and spill water onto the pristine white tablecloth. "Are you okay, Mama?" Kesha asked, finally looking up from her screen at the spill. "I'm fine," Mama Beatrice snapped, though her words slurred just a fraction, bleeding into one another. "Just a little hot in here. Terrence, go turn down the thermostat. Right now." Terrence looked confused but dutifully stood up to adjust the central air panel on the wall. I kept eating my dinner. For minutes. The silence in the dining room began to stretch, pulling tight like a piano wire about to snap. Mama Beatrice abruptly put down her spoon. Her breathing grew shallow and uneven, her chest heaving. She stared straight ahead into empty space, her eyes widening as if she were seeing something terrifying and invisible to the rest of us. "Mama Beatrice?" I asked, injecting just the right amount of innocent daughterly concern into my tone. "Is the gumbo too spicy for you today?" She didn't answer. Instead, a strange, low chuckle rumbled deep in her chest. It was a dark, guttural, uncharacteristic sound that made Kesha drop her phone onto the table with a loud clatter. The chuckle bubbled up her throat and erupted into a loud, uncontrollable, hysterical laugh. "Mama?" Terrence asked, turning around from the thermostat. His face drained of all color as he looked at his mother. 5 minutes. The silent countdown in my head reached 0. Mama Beatrice threw her head back violently and let out a piercing, manic shriek of laughter that echoed off the dining room walls. Her manicured hands gripped the edge of the heavy wooden table, so tightly her knuckles turned bone white. She looked wildly around the room. Her pupils completely dilated, rolling back slightly into her skull. Her dignified, church-going facade melted away in an instant, replaced by a terrifying, uncontrolled madness. The laughter didn't stop. It morphed into a wet, choking gasp as Mama Beatrice clawed at the collar of her custom-tailored pink suit. The room descended into absolute chaos within seconds. Darius, my brother-in-law, who had been quietly scrolling on his phone in the corner all evening, finally looked up. He dropped his device on the thick Persian carpet, his mouth hanging open in disbelief. Kesha pushed her chair back so fast it tipped over and crashed against the hardwood floor. "What's wrong with her?" Kesha screamed, backing away toward the heavy china cabinet. "Terrence, do something. Call an ambulance right now." Terrence was completely frozen. He stared at his mother, his jaw tight, and then slowly turned his eyes toward the 2 identical ceramic bowls of gumbo on the table. The realization hit him like a physical blow. But before he could form a coherent thought or make a move, Mama Beatrice began to speak, or rather, to project her darkest, most closely guarded secrets to the entire room at the top of her lungs. The hallucinogens had completely short-circuited the frontal lobe of her brain, stripping away decades of carefully curated religious hypocrisy. "Look at the little demons," she screeched, pointing a shaking, jewel-encrusted finger directly at Kesha. "Look at them crawling all over your cheap, fake hair. You think the Lord doesn't see you, Kesha? You think I don't know what you do when the sanctuary doors are locked?" "Know what?" Kesha stammered, looking around frantically as if actual insects were descending from the ceiling. "Mama, sit down. You're having a medical emergency. You're having a stroke. A stroke of genius." Mama Beatrice howled, slamming her fists onto the table so hard the crystal water glasses shattered, sending shards of glass and ice flying. "I know about the youth fund, you little thief. $15,000. You thought you could just skim $15,000 from the church youth retreat fund to pay for your ridiculous cosmetic surgeries, and nobody would notice? I had to cook the books. I had to forge the quarterly audit reports to keep the senior pastor from calling the police on my own daughter. You're a disgrace to the sanctuary. You're a thief, just like your father was." Kesha's face turned the color of wet ash. She looked at Terrence, then at Darius, her eyes wide with undeniable, paralyzing guilt. She didn't even try to deny it. The hallucinogen had acted as a brutal truth serum, ripping away the pious, holy roller facade Mama Beatrice wore like impenetrable armor. As a forensic accountant, I cataloged every single word. That $15,000 discrepancy was something I could track through the church's public tax filings if I ever needed leverage later. But the drugs Terrence had procured weren't just cognitive disruptors. They were a violent, unstable cocktail designed to completely incapacitate the human nervous system. Suddenly, Mama Beatrice stopped yelling. Her eyes bugged out, and she gripped her stomach with both hands, letting out a low, agonizing groan that sounded almost demonic. The secondary compound Terrence had mixed into the powder, a massive, industrial-grade dose of laxatives, took brutal and immediate effect. Right there in the middle of her pristine dining room, wearing her $2,000 Sunday church suit, Mama Beatrice lost complete control of her bodily functions. The foul, unmistakable stench filled the room instantly, overpowering the rich aroma of the seafood gumbo. It was immediate, explosive, and entirely humiliating. She slumped forward in her chair, groaning and weeping as the hallucinogens continued to scramble her brain, trapping her in a waking nightmare while her body betrayed her in the most degrading way possible. "Oh my God!" Kesha gagged, covering her nose and mouth with both hands, stumbling backward until her back hit the floral wallpaper. She ruined the custom chairs. She ruined everything. I can't breathe in here. Terrence didn't care about the mess. He didn't care about his mother crying in a puddle of her own filth. His eyes were locked entirely on me. The mask of the charming, struggling real estate agent dissolved completely, revealing the predator underneath. His face contorted into pure, unadulterated rage. The veins in his neck bulged against his tightly buttoned collar. He looked from the empty bowl in front of his mother to the barely touched bowl in front of me. He knew exactly what I had done, and he knew that I knew what he had tried to do. "You switched them," he whispered, his voice trembling with a terrifying, homicidal fury that sent a chill down my spine. "You switched the bowls." I sat perfectly still, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I looked at the pathetic, chaotic scene unfolding around me and felt nothing but cold, calculated clarity. I didn't ask him what he was talking about. I didn't play dumb or act confused. I simply looked him dead in the eye and delivered the truth he couldn't handle. "If you're going to try to drug your wife to steal a massive life insurance policy, Terrence, you really shouldn't turn your back to get the hot sauce. It's sloppy work, just like your fake real estate accounting. Did you really think I wouldn't notice the offshore transfers?" That was the breaking point. The sound that ripped from Terrence's throat wasn't human. It was the roar of a cornered animal realizing its trap had snapped shut on its own leg. He lunged across the wide mahogany table, shattering plates and sending silver cutlery flying. His heavy boots crushed the spilled food as he scrambled over the wood, his hands outstretched like rigid claws. I barely had time to shift my weight back before his fingers wrapped around my throat. He tackled me, and my heavy wooden chair crashed to the floor with a deafening thud. The back of my head slammed against the Persian rug. Stars burst in my vision, but adrenaline flooded my system instantly. His thumbs pressed deep into my windpipe, brutally cutting off my air. His face was inches from mine, spit flying from his lips as he screamed, "I'm going to kill you. You ruined everything. You ruined my life, you arrogant, cold-hearted witch. I needed that money. Darius owes the cartel $3 million, and you ruined the plan. I'll snap your neck right here, and tell them you attacked my mother." I clawed at his wrists, my manicured nails digging deep into his skin, drawing crescent-shaped beads of blood. But he was too heavy, too desperate. The edges of my vision began to darken, a fuzzy gray ring closing in. I needed to breathe. I bucked my hips upward, trying to dislodge his center of gravity, but he pinned my legs down with his knees. Kesha was screaming hysterically in the background, but she didn't step forward to help me. She just stood against the wall and watched her brother strangle his wife to death. "Darius!" Terrence roared without looking back, his grip tightening even further. "Help me hold her down. Grab something. Hit her in the head." Darius, whose own life was apparently on the line with whatever underground syndicate he owed money to, snapped out of his shock. He grabbed the heavy wooden dining chair Kesha had knocked over earlier. He lifted it high above his head, stepping carefully over his mother, who was still rolling on the floor, laughing and crying in her own waist. Darius raised the heavy chair, his eyes fixed on my forehead. He was going to cave my skull in and frame it as an accident. He was going to finish what the poison was supposed to start. I stopped struggling against Terrence's grip for a fraction of a second. I let my body go completely limp. Terrence felt the sudden lack of resistance and, anticipating my loss of consciousness, slightly relaxed his grip to catch his own breath. That was all the leverage I needed. I brought my right knee up with every ounce of strength I had left, driving it violently into his groin. Terrence let out a high-pitched, breathless gasp, his eyes widening in pure agony. His hands released my throat immediately as he rolled off my chest, curling into a tight fetal position on the floor, clutching himself and groaning. I gasped desperately for air, rolling onto my side just as Darius brought the heavy oak chair crashing down. The thick wooden legs smashed into the floorboards inches from my face, splintering into jagged pieces. I scrambled backward across the floor, coughing violently, my throat burning like I had swallowed hot coals. Darius raised the broken chair again, stepping forward to deliver a second fatal blow. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, but I didn't need to make a call. The failsafe I had established before I even walked into this house was already in motion. 10 minutes ago, right when Mama Beatrice had started her lecture about my lack of children, I had reached under the table and pressed the emergency SOS button on my Apple Watch. I knew the moment I swapped those bowls that violence was the only language this family had left. I had silently broadcast my exact GPS location and an open, real-time audio feed directly to the local emergency dispatch center. They had heard the confession about the stolen church funds. They had heard Terrence admit to the massive cartel debt. And they had heard him threatening to snap my neck. Before Darius could swing the shattered chair a second time, the piercing, unmistakable wail of police sirens flooded the quiet suburban neighborhood, instantly drowning out Kesha's screaming and Mama Beatrice's psychotic laughter. Red and blue lights flashed wildly through the large bay windows, painting the dining room in a chaotic, strobing glare. Darius froze, the chair still suspended above his head. He looked toward the window, absolute panic washing over his face. He dropped the chair with a loud clatter and bolted toward the back door, abandoning his brother and his mother without a second thought. Heavy, hurried footsteps pounded up the front steps. Fists pounded against the solid oak front door, followed immediately by the splintering crash of a tactical battering ram. The thick wooden door burst off its hinges, and 3 heavily armed police officers flooded into the foyer, their bright tactical flashlights cutting through the dim hallway. "Police! Drop your weapons! Show me your hands right now!" I remained on the floor, clutching my deeply bruised throat, deliberately looking as helpless and terrified as possible. Terrence, still grimacing in pain, fought his way to his knees. He looked at the armed officers, their weapons drawn, and then looked directly at me. In a split second, his twisted survival instinct hijacked his brain. He raised his hands in the air, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Officers, help us!" Terrence screamed, perfectly mimicking the frantic terror of a traumatized victim. "Arrest my wife! She poisoned my mother's food and just tried to kill me. She's completely insane. Arrest her now!" The officers didn't hesitate. They didn't look at the shattered pieces of the heavy oak chair lying inches from my head. They didn't notice the dark, crescent-shaped fingernail marks, and the brutal bruising already blooming across my windpipe, where Terrence had just tried to squeeze the life out of me. They saw a screaming, seemingly traumatized husband begging for help. They saw an older woman rolling on the floor in a state of grotesque psychosis. And they saw me sitting silently on the floor. Their implicit bias made the decision for them in a fraction of a second. 2 officers lunged forward, grabbed my arms, and brutally wrenched them behind my back. I felt the cold, heavy metal of the handcuffs bite viciously into my wrists as the ratchets clicked shut. I didn't fight back. I knew better than to resist arrest. I went limp, allowing them to haul me up from the ruined dining room floor. As they dragged me toward the broken front door, I locked eyes with Terrence. He was still kneeling on the floor, pretending to cry for the benefit of the police. But the moment the officers turned their backs, a slow, malicious smirk spread across his face. He mouthed the words, "Game over." I was shoved into the back of a smelly, hard plastic seat in a police cruiser. The ride to the precinct was a blur of flashing lights and crackling police radio. I sat in silence, analyzing the board like a grandmaster playing a high-stakes game of chess. Terrence thought he had checkmated me. He thought the police would lock me away, giving him free rein to execute whatever contingency plan he had for the life insurance and the cartel debt. He had no idea what was coming. At the precinct, I was stripped of my personal belongings, save for my clothes, and thrown into a freezing, windowless interrogation room. My left wrist was cuffed to a heavy metal ring bolted to the steel table. The walls were painted a sickening shade of institutional gray. A single fluorescent bulb buzzed aggressively overhead. The air smelled of stale coffee and old sweat. I sat there for 3 agonizing hours. A classic interrogation tactic. Break my spirit, isolate me, let the panic set in before they even asked a question. But I wasn't panicking. I was waiting. Finally, the heavy metal door swung open. 2 detectives walked in. The lead was a tall, broad-shouldered white man in a cheap suit who looked like he hadn't slept in days. His name tag read Detective Miller. Behind him was a younger female detective, Detective Reynolds, carrying a thick manila folder. Neither looked at me with an ounce of objective curiosity. They looked at me like I was already convicted. Miller pulled out a metal chair and sat down heavily across from me. He folded his hands on the table. Reynolds stood by the door, her arms crossed. "Charmaine," Miller began, his voice dripping with condescension. "Do you know how much trouble you're in right now? Your mother-in-law is in the intensive care unit, getting her stomach pumped. She's suffering from severe cardiac distress induced by a massive overdose of ketamine and industrial laxatives. Your husband is in the waiting room, terrified for his life. He told us everything." I sat up straight, making direct eye contact with Miller. "I would like to state for the record that my husband violently attacked me. If you look at my neck, you will see the physical evidence of strangulation. Furthermore, my brother-in-law, Darius, attempted to strike me with a wooden chair. I was the one who triggered the emergency SOS." Reynolds scoffed loudly from the corner. "Give it a rest, Charmaine. We've already taken statements from Terrence and Kesha. They both confirmed that you attacked Terrence when he tried to stop you from fleeing the scene after you poisoned his mother. The bruising on your neck is from him trying to restrain you. Self-defense." It was a beautifully constructed lie. Terrence had anticipated my defense and flipped the narrative instantly. But he hadn't just stopped at witness statements. Detective Miller reached out, took the thick manila folder from Reynolds, and slammed it down onto the steel table between us. He flipped it open, revealing stacks of printed documents, medical letterheads, and prescription logs. "We know about your condition, Charmaine," Miller said, his tone shifting from aggressive to a mockingly gentle pity that turned my stomach. "Terrence gave us full access to your medical history. He brought these files straight from his home safe. He told us how hard he's been trying to manage your illness behind closed doors to protect your high-powered corporate career." I frowned slightly, genuinely confused for a fraction of a second. "My illness?" Reynolds walked forward and tapped a manicured finger on the top document. "Don't play dumb. We have your psychiatric evaluation records right here. Signed by Dr. Aries Thorne. Diagnoses of severe paranoid schizophrenia, chronic delusions, and violent manic episodes. We have a 6-month history of forged therapy notes detailing your irrational belief that your husband's family was trying to steal from you. We even have pharmacy records showing you've been refusing to take your prescribed antipsychotic medication for the last 8 weeks." My mind raced, the forensic accountant inside me rapidly decoding the data. Terrence hadn't just decided to drug me tonight on a whim. This had been in motion for half a year. He had found a corrupt doctor, or completely fabricated one. He had generated a flawless, verifiable paper trail of mental instability. He had built an entire alternative reality in the public record. If I died, he was the grieving widower of a tragic suicide. If I survived, as I had tonight, he was the victim of a violently insane wife. Either way, he gained full legal conservatorship over my estate, my bank accounts, and my life insurance. It was absolutely brilliant and entirely evil. They want to build the narrative of the crazy, dangerous black woman. I realized silently, it's the easiest story for the system to swallow. The police would look at my success, my wealth, and easily believe the lie that the pressure had cracked my mind. Terrence loves you, Charmaine, Miller continued, leaning in closer. He doesn't want to see you go to a maximum security prison. He wants to get you the help you need, but you have to cooperate with us. You need to sign a full confession detailing exactly how you put the drugs in the food. If you confess right now, I can talk to the district attorney. We can bypass a criminal trial and petition for a mandatory indefinite psychiatric hold. You'll go to a secure hospital instead of a penitentiary. They were trying to strong-arm me into a false confession. They wanted to close the case before the end of their shift. And if I refused to sign your fabricated confession? I asked softly, my voice devoid of emotion. Miller slammed his hand on the table, the loud crack echoing in the small room. Then I will charge you with first-degree attempted murder. I will charge you with aggravated assault. I will make sure the prosecutor asks for no bail. You will sit in a county jail cell while we take this to a jury. With your medical records and 2 eyewitness testimonies against you, you're looking at 20 years behind bars. You will lose your license, your career, your house, and your freedom. Your life as you know it is over. The silence in the room stretched out, heavy and suffocating. Reynolds looked at me with disgust. Miller looked at me with impatient anger. They expected me to break. They expected tears. They expected the panicked begging of a woman whose entire world had just been systematically dismantled by the man she married. Instead, I let out a slow, deliberate breath. And then I smiled. Not a small smile. A wide, genuine, completely relaxed smile that reached my eyes. I saw the immediate confusion on Miller's face. He recoiled slightly, likely thinking the alleged schizophrenia was manifesting right in front of him. You think this is funny? Reynolds snapped, stepping toward the table. You're looking at 2 decades in a cage, you psycho. I leaned forward as far as the handcuffs would allow. The metal chain clinked sharply against the table. I looked directly into Detective Miller's eyes. I think it's hilarious, Detective, I said, my voice steady and commanding. I think it's hilarious that in your rush to close this case, you completely failed to perform a basic physical search of a corporate fraud investigator. You read those fake medical files and decided you had all the answers, but you missed one very important detail about what I do for a living. Miller frowned, his eyes narrowing. What are you talking about? In my line of work, I deal with men who lie for a living, I explained calmly. Embezzlers, corrupt executives, money launderers. I walk into hostile environments every single day. I never walk into a room without an insurance policy, and I certainly don't sit down to dinner with a husband I know is drowning in cartel debt without keeping my eyes wide open. I shifted my shoulders slightly, sitting up taller. Detective Miller, I want you to look closely at my silk blouse. Notice the top button, right below my collarbone. Miller squinted, leaning across the table to inspect my shirt. It's not a button, I whispered. It's a high-def, wide-angle micro-lens connected to a continuous loop recording device hidden in the lining of my bra. It records both video and crystal-clear audio. It's been recording since I walked into that dining room 2 hours ago. It recorded Terrence pulling the vial from his pocket. It recorded him dumping the powder into my bowl. It recorded me swapping the bowls while his back was turned. And it recorded his full confession about the $3 million debt while his hands were around my throat. The color instantly drained from Detective Miller's face. Reynolds stopped breathing, her eyes darting from me to the supposed button on my blouse. Now, I said, my smile turning into a sharp, predatory grin. Be a gentleman. Unbutton the top button of my silk blouse, Pull out the device and plug it into your laptop. Let's watch the tape, Detective." Detective Miller stared at me for a long, heavy moment. The arrogance had vanished, replaced by a pale, creeping dread. His hand shook slightly as he reached across the steel table, his thick fingers clumsily unfastening the top silk button. He pulled the tiny black magnetic device free and held it up to the harsh fluorescent light like a live grenade. Detective Reynolds didn't say a word. She simply walked over to the table, opened her heavy silver laptop, and plugged the micro USB drive into the port. The interrogation room fell dead silent as the video player launched. There it was, in crisp high-definition color and perfect, unfiltered audio. The recording showed the dining room from my exact point of view. They watched Terrence reach into his expensive tailored jacket. They watched him unscrew the tiny glass vial. They watched the white powder fall silently into my bowl of seafood gumbo. Then the camera shifted wildly for a fraction of a second as I reached across the table and swapped the bowls while his back was turned. They heard Terrence's falsely sweet voice urging me to eat. They heard Mama Beatrice's vile, hypocritical insults about my career and my inability to bear children. But the most damning part was the end. The detectives watched in stunned horror as Terrence violently tackled me to the floor. The audio was crystal clear. They heard every word of his unhinged, desperate confession. They heard him explicitly state his intention to murder me. They heard him explicitly confirm that Darius owed $3 million to an underground cartel. They heard him explicitly state that my death was the solution to their massive debt. Reynolds slammed the laptop shut. She looked at me, her face flushed with profound embarrassment and professional panic. They had almost railroaded an innocent woman into a 20-year prison sentence, or a lifetime in a maximum security psychiatric ward, based entirely on forged documents provided by the actual attempted murderer. "Unlock the cuffs," Miller ordered, his voice thick and raspy. He didn't look at me. He couldn't look at me. "Do it right now." Reynolds scrambled to pull the small metal key from her duty belt. She fumbled with the locks, her hands trembling, as the heavy steel cuffs finally snapped open. I rubbed my bruised wrists slowly, taking my time, letting the crushing weight of their colossal failure sit heavily in the small, stifling room. "We are extremely sorry, Charmaine," Miller stammered, pulling out his shoulder radio. "I'm issuing an immediate statewide arrest warrant for Terrence and Darius. I'll send units back to the house and to the hospital right now. You're free to go. We'll need the camera as evidence, but you can collect your personal belongings at the front desk." I didn't say thank you. I simply stood up, smoothed the wrinkles from my silk trousers, and walked out of the interrogation room without a backward glance. I navigated the busy, brightly lit corridors of the precinct, my mind already 10 steps ahead of the police. Terrence was a coward, but a desperate one with a massive head start. He knew the police would eventually figure out the truth, even if he thought I was locked away for the night. He wouldn't just sit in the hospital waiting room playing the devoted son. I reached the front desk and signed the release forms to get my personal property back. The desk sergeant handed me my leather handbag, my car keys, and my phone. The battery was at 40%. As soon as I powered the device on, the screen completely froze. For a full 10 seconds, the processor struggled to handle the sheer volume of incoming data. And then the notification chimes began. Not a single alert, a rapid, continuous cascade of metallic pings that sounded like a slot machine paying out a jackpot. But this wasn't a victory. This was an absolute financial slaughter. I stood in the middle of the crowded police lobby, my eyes scanning the notifications pouring in from 5 different banking applications. Alert, transfer of. My heart slammed against my ribs, but the forensic accountant in me instantly suppressed the rising panic. I opened the banking applications one by one. The balances were zero, negative, maxed out to the absolute limit. I sat in a hard plastic chair against the lobby wall, my fingers numb, analyzing the timestamps. He had executed the first transfer exactly 4 minutes after the police dragged me out of the dining room. He had been tapping the authorization buttons on his phone while he was faking tears in front of the arresting officers. The sheer sociopathic calculation was breathtaking. He had bypassed two-factor authentication by intercepting the security codes routed to our home landline, which he had clearly forwarded to his own mobile device before dinner even started. He had drained over $250,000 in pure liquid cash in less than 180 minutes. My entire safety net, the money I had worked 70-hour weeks to build from the ground up, was completely gone. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the precinct and stepped out into the